Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Hasan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 106. With our book today, I'm going to read a little synopsis here just to start the show. With our book today, a novel that has embedded itself so deeply into the overall psyche of the United States of America that it is confused in the average reader's minds and memories with things that didn't really historically happen. Books and stories create cultural memories, and this book that we are going to be covering today has created more cultural memories in the minds of Americans from the age of 8 all the way to adulthood than probably any other book written in the last 150 years. The author of this book developed her approach to writing during the Gilded Age of the United States of America, an era that probably was the last time that ripening cultural confidence in the American way of life and the American approach to family and culture was relatively undisputed. She was also a female author, just like Baroness Karen Blixen, whose work we covered in episode number 105. And she was heavily influenced, just as the Baroness was, by her father, as well as her positions and her family's positions around the burgeoning feminist movement in the United States post-Civil War. Today, we will be covering the book based on the author's lived experiences during the American Civil War, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Yeah, this is going to be a real interesting one today. We're not going to read the whole book. We can't possibly do that. So we are going to read selections from it. And of course, we are joined by our regular co-host, Tom Libby. How you doing, Tom?
I am doing fantastic, Hasan. I can't wait till a couple of guys break down Little Women, like the sisterhood of Little Women.
This is going to be great.
This is going to be fascinating.
This is going to be spectacular. This is going to be spectacular. During the month of May, where we are recording this the day after Mother's Day. So to all of you mothers who are listening out there, happy Mother's Day. And well, to all of you mothers out there, you know who you are. And Tom just had his birthday. So happy birthday to Tom Libby.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I won't ask how old you are because that would be impolite on the show.
I've had a couple of summers under my belt.
We were talking about this a little bit because Tom and I are relatively close in age. We can remember when things happened historically at similar points in our lives. We have some overlap in some in a few areas. And you know, when you get to a point where you've seen a few summers, then you get to actually preface that or use that as a preface. That's how I want to say it. You get to use that as a preface for putting things in a particular context. And so I anticipate that Tom will start doing this fairly soon here on the show.
Yeah. We'll say this. I'll say this. I remember the first time I could say, well, 20 years ago, we did this, this, and this. And I was referencing my work life. Mm-hmm. I realized I was getting old.
There you go.
I realized I was getting old.
Well, you shouldn't. I don't think you should frame it as getting old. I think you should frame it as you're aging like fine wine.
I think that'll be out for debate. We'll just leave it at that.
Or you can say curdling like milk. I mean, either one. Like
Either way,
you can pick one. You can pick one. Pick one or the other. Oh Lord. All right. Well, leaders, this is a book that similar to, I would say, The Good Earth probably is going to be the most interesting. We're gonna have the most interesting conversations around this, and we are going to, of course, talk about, as we usually do on the podcast, the literary life of Louisa May Alcott. We're going to talk about her background. She is one of the more interesting, I would say, female writers or female authors of the 19th century, particularly the American 19th century, and she was a product of. Well, she was a product of her age, which is something that we all are, no matter how many summers we have seen. All right. I'm going to go to the book here. We're going to start off a little bit here. And again, we're not going to read the whole book. We're just going to read selections from the book. I would encourage you to pick it up. From Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. When Mr. March lost his property in trying to help an unfortunate friend, the two oldest girls begged to be allowed to do something toward their own support, at least. Believing that they could not begin too early to cultivate energy, industry, and independence, their parents consented, and both fell to work with a hearty goodwill, in spite of all the obstacles, is sure to succeed at last. Margaret found a place as a nursery governess and felt rich with her small salary. As she said, she was, quote, fond of luxury, unquote, and her chief trouble was poverty. She found it harder to bear than the others because she could remember a time when home was beautiful, life full of ease and pleasure, and want of any kind unknown. She tried not to be envious or discontented, but it was very natural that the young girl should long for pretty things, gay friends, accomplishments, and a happy life. At the King's, she daily saw all she wanted, for the children's older sisters were just out, and May caught frequent glimpses of dainty ball dresses and bouquets, heard lively gossip about theaters, concerts, sleighing parties, and merrymakings of all kinds, and saw money lavished on trifles which would have been so precious to her. Poor Meg seldom complained, but a sense of injustice made her feel bitter toward everyone sometimes, for she had not yet learned to know how rich she was in the blessings which alone can make life happy. Jo happened to suit Aunt March, who was lame and needed an active person to wait upon her. The childless old lady had offered to adopt one of the girls when the troubles came, and was much offended because her offer was declined. Other friends told the Marches that they had lost all chance of being remembered in the rich old lady's will, but the unworldly Marches only said, "We can't give up our girls for a dozen fortunes. Rich or poor, we will keep together and be happy in one another." The old lady wouldn't speak to them for a time, but happening to meet Jo at a friend's, something in her comical face and blunt manner struck the old lady's fancy, and she proposed to take her for a companion. This did not suit Jo at all, but she accepted the place since nothing better appeared, and to everyone's surprise, got on remarkably well with her irascible relative. There was an occasional tempest, and once Jo marched home declaring she couldn't bear it longer, but Aunt March always cleared up quickly and sent for her to come back again with such urgency that she could not refuse, for in her heart she rather liked the peppery old lady. I suspect the real attraction was the large library of fine books, which was left to dust and spiders since Uncle March died. Jo remembered the kind old gentleman who used to let her build railroads and bridges with his big dictionaries, tell her stories about queer pictures in his Latin books, and buy her cards of gingerbread whenever he met her on the street. The dim, dusty room with the busts staring down from the tall bookcases, the cozy chairs, the globes, and best of all, the wilderness of books in which she could wander where she liked, made the library a region of bliss for her. The moment Aunt March took her nap or was busy with company, Jo hurried to this quiet place and, curling herself up in the easy chair, devoured poetry, romance, history, travels, and pictures like a regular bookworm. But like all happiness, it did not last long, for as sure as she had just reached to the heart of the story, the sweetest verse of a song or the most perilous adventure of her traveler, a shrill voice called, "Josephine, Josephine," and she had to leave her paradise to wind yarn, wash the poodle, or read Belsham's essays by the hour together. And then I'm going to skip that paragraph and I'm going to go to this. Beth was too bashful to go to school. It had been tried, but she suffered so much that it was given up as she did her lessons at home with her father. Even when he went away and her mother was called to devote her skill and energy to soldiers' aid societies, Beth went faithfully on by herself and did the best she could. She was a housewifely little creature and helped Hannah keep home neat and comfortable for the workers, never thinking of any reward but to be loved. Long, quiet days she spent, not lonely or idle, for her little world was peopled with imaginary friends, and she was by nature a busy bee. There were 6 dolls to be taken up and dressed every morning, for Beth was a child and still loved her pets as well as ever. Not one whole or handsome one among them. All were outcasts till Beth took them in. For when her sisters outgrew these idols, they passed to her because Amy would have nothing old or ugly. Beth cherished them all the more tenderly for that reason and set up a hospital for infirm dolls. No pins were ever stuck into their cotton vitals. No harsh words or blows were ever given them. No neglect ever sat in the heart of the most repulsive, but all were fed and clothed, nursed and caressed with an affection which never failed. One forlorn fragment of Delanity had belonged to Joe, and having led a tempestuous life, was left a wreck in a rag bag from which dreary poorhouse it was rescued by Beth and taken to her refuge. Having no top to its head, she tied on a neat little cap, and as both arms and legs were gone, she hid these deficiencies by folding it in a blanket and devoting her best bed to this chronic invalid. If anyone had known the care lavished on that dolly, I think it would have touched their hearts even while they laughed. She brought it bits of bouquets. She read to it, took it out to breathe fresh air. Hidden under her coat, she sang it lullabies and never went to bed without kissing its dirty face and whispering tenderly, "I hope you'll have a good night, my poor dear." There are many Beths in the world, shy and quiet, sitting in corners till needed and living for others so cheerfully that no one sees the sacrifice till the little cricket on the hearth stops chirping and the sweet sunshiny presence vanishes, leaving silence and shadow behind. So who is this Louisa May Alcott? Again, a book so embedded into the American psyche that we actually don't really think about the book or the author anymore. We just sort of take it up whole cloth. We do Little Women and the other book she wrote, Little Men, and we kind of combine it in our heads, or at least I do, combine it in my head with everything that I ever used to see on Little House on the Prairie. Remember that show from the 1970s? Yeah. It kind of all merges together in my head. And that's because it's part of a collective conscience that we all have around a particular era that all of us were born, at least those of us who are listening to the podcast today, all of us were born too late to directly experience. And so, of course, that era is now fading into, perhaps has already long faded into myth. But who created those myths, right? And we've talked about whether or not myths are accurate on this podcast, but myths are necessary for a culture. Well, we have to know who wrote those myths, right? And so Louisa May Alcott was born November 29th, 1832, and she died March 6th, 1888. She wrote short stories, she wrote poetry, and of course, she wrote multiple novels. She was raised in New England by her Transcendentalist parents. We're going to talk a little bit about Transcendentalism today, too, because it relates to this idea of generational turnings and generational cycles and religious awakenings that happened in the United States. And she was part of, well, her parents were part of the back end of the Second Great Awakening in the United States. And so this Great Awakening produced a lot of different artistic efforts, particularly in the literary and novel space. So when Louisa May Alcott was growing up, she was surrounded by many of the well-known intellectuals of the day that were part of the Transcendentalist movement, including Margaret Fuller, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Henry David Thoreau, and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Early in her career, she sometimes used pen names such as A.M. Barnard, under which she wrote lurid short stories and sensation novels for adults that focused on passion and revenge. Poverty was a driver, as it was mentioned there in that little piece there from Little Women, but poverty made it necessary for Louisa May Alcott to go to work at an early age as a teacher, a seamstress, a governess, a domestic helper, and, of course, a writer. Her sisters also supported the family, working as seamstresses, while their mother took on social work among the Irish immigrants. Only the youngest, Abigail, was able to attend public school. Due to all of these pressures, writing became a creative and emotional outlet for Alcott. As a matter of fact, in the Civil War, she served as a nurse in Washington, D.C., and wrote letters home that inspired her book Hospital Sketches, which was written in 1863. And then later on, she published Little Women in 1868. She banged out, get this, 500 pages of writing in 3 months. Take that, ChatGPT. Some things still do defy the algorithm. Along with Elizabeth Stoddard, Rebecca Harding Davis, and Moncure Crane, and others, Alcott was part of a group of female authors during the Gilded Age, which was the age that came right after the Civil War. And she was lauded for addressing women's issues in a modern and candid manner. Their works were, as one newspaper columnist of the era noted, among the decided, quote unquote, signs of the times. By the way, back in the day, the signs that they were looking at were the signs that the feminist movement was gaining traction. Women were angling for the right to vote, and the abolitionists who had stirred up the Civil War had to redirect their energies. And so they were directing it to social change, in particular, social change with the incoming, not only Irish, but also Eastern European immigrants that were showing up in New York Harbor, trying to escape the revolutions of Europe as it went through its own convulsions coming out of its long, long 19th century. So that's a little background on Louisa May Alcott. That's a little background on Little Women. So I'm going to switch this over to Tom now because I've rambled long enough. So Tom has not read the book as usual, but he has seen the movie and he did want to talk about Winona Ryder. So I'll kick it over to you. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say I was gonna have a question before answer here because I feel like people don't give enough credit to some of the information that you just read off, right? Because there's a sense of like, was this the beginning of the end of the women should be seen and not heard kind of scenarios? Like, I know it might have taken 100 years. I get that, and I understand that women still felt that way in the early 20th century. Probably right up until toward the end of the 20th century, but I mean, she was really advanced in this particular area. She was much more advanced than people give her credit for, at least I think.
So a lot of the social reforming movements that eventually wound up in the civil rights movements of the latter part of the 20th century started, if you look at history, if you look at history in cycles rather than as just a straight line,
right,
began in cycles that started with the Second Great Awakening, which began in like 1830, 1824, somewhere in there, and then slowly began to wind out. By the way, out of that came the abolitionist movement, which the abolitionists, I mean, yes, people had always been opposed to slavery in the United States, always, like since the founding. That was not anything new. But the level of the temperature on the pot got turned up a lot as the pastors and the preachers of the day would, particularly those in the Northeast, in your neck of the woods, would claim that the Holy Spirit was moving through the country and was marching through and trampling out the truth, right? That's how they would frame it. But you also had, and you always see this with religious revivals and revivalism in the United States. You see a religious revival, and then you see a secular move as well, moving along that with that same energy alongside of it. And so the abolitionist movement was both religious and secular. We just have to talk about it in both those or you do have to reference it in both those contexts. But you are correct. The feminist movement, the proto-feminist movement, began right alongside that abolitionist movement. As a matter of fact, I've long made the argument that the middle class and aristocratic Caucasian women of the era, WASP women of the era, once the Civil War had been fought and done, needed somewhere else to put their, because they were in shell shock just like the men were. They needed someplace else to put their energies, and feminism kind of opened the door because there's a lot. I mean, there was a lot of space, a lot of dead men. I mean, whole entire families taken off. And so who was going to step into those roles? Well, it was going to be women. And so they were empowered, and thus they could move forward. And that's what Louisa May Alcott saw as well.
Well, especially like, and to your point, men would go off to the Civil War, die, and women would run their ranches, run their farms, and then there was like an epiphany almost going, wait, we can do this. Like,
ding.
So I feel like, when you talk about like, I forget how you worded it a few minutes ago, when you talk about books like this and like The Little House on the Prairies and the, things like that, being this like myth, you're talking about myths. I think of it almost like romanticizing of what life was like back then, as much as it is myth, right? But it's like it's interesting to me because for all the like, mind you, people listening here, you couldn't pay me enough to go back to that era and live a life like it was a hard life. But for some reason, when you read these and they romanticize about it as being like this glorious and wonderful, and look how like life is so different and we can do that, and like it makes me kind of chuckle going, wait, I know the actual history about that timeline, and nobody would volunteer to go back in that time and live then.
So nobody first off, Tom,
do it.
You have nothing to worry about because Quantum Leap told us that you cannot leap past your time in which you were born. You just can't. So you're stuck in your own. Like, that's it. You're done. You can't leap past the time you were born. Quantum Leap set that. Precedent. Like, that's the rule. That's the rule. That's how physics works. Don't you understand? You also need a flux capacitor. I was trying to explain this to my kid the other day. You need a flux capacitor in order to make time travel possible. So we don't have a flux capacitor.
We haven't even done that yet. So
we haven't even gotten there yet. So we're good. So you don't have to worry about that. That doesn't want it. But on a more serious note, when I read that she banged out 500 pages in 3 months.
Incredible.
That's incredible. The only way you get to do that is if you don't have any of the modern conveniences that we've got.
Or the modern distractions.
Bingo. Right? That's right.
Yeah.
For every convenience, there is a distraction. Just like, for every revival, for every religious revival in America, there's a secular component that goes along with it. For every convenience, there's a distraction. So for every time-saving act of like, okay, I don't have to wash my clothes down by the river anymore and hang them up and whistle while I work. I can just shove them into a washing machine. Yeah, that's great. I can do more at scale, but now I'm going to spend this time like doom scrolling on TikTok. Like, I'm not going to write like,
this is one of my favorite debates. This is one of my classic debates in my house. The whole myth, you talk about myths, whole myth of multitasking. Because it's a myth. I hate to tell you this, people, but it's a myth. There is no way that you are going to be able and capable of functioning two completely separate mental functions at the same time. It just doesn't happen, right? No. So, but they always throw things at me like that. Like, oh, well, I can put the water on for the pasta and go cut the vegetables. Okay, are you sitting there boiling the water? No, you're lighting a stove. That's not multitasking. The water, the flame is cooking the water. I can put my load of wash in the washing machine and I can go cook dinner. That is not multitasking. The washing machine is washing the dishes.
Well,
right? Back in those days, if you're down by the river washing the clothes, you're not at the house cooking dinner.
Well, and here's the other thing that we have to remember. And I always call attention to this. So yes, you're correct. Multitasking is a myth. I'm going to settle that in your house. You just tell them I said so, and it's done. Yeah. We're finished. Now, okay. All right. Sometimes that's come from a stranger. Sometimes you can't hear the truth from people in your own family.
My youngest son will be the biggest Weisenheimer that there is, right? He'll be like, yeah, but I can walk and chew gum at the same time. That's multitasking, Dad. And I go, no, that's subconscious thought. You don't have to think to do that.
Don't don't. Is this the same person that walks out of your house after you're done doing the lawn work, yard work, and looks at you and goes, "Would you like to have some help?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, well, so see there. Okay, yeah, you got problems up and down the hierarchy. All right. um, no, the other thing that I think about often is, okay, for those people in that time, and we have to really, I think, get our arms around this idea. So the challenge of history is that we think it's, and the way it's taught to in school, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, it's not taught in cycles as if things, return, which they do. They just come in different forms. Instead, we teach history as a progressive arrow that's always moving forward and never moving backward and always better and better. Okay. Or a J curve that goes up and to the right. Okay. One of the other problems psychologically and just, I think, epistemically, just to use a word that encompasses, emotions and psychology and religious thinking together. Epistemically, we lack humility in our current era, which is one of the things that bugs me, because we think, just like you said, oh, well, back then it's terrible. Okay, but if you go back, if you actually look at how they wrote back then, and Louisa May Alcott writes this way in Little Women, they're not writing as if they think it's terrible.
Yeah.
They think it's the height of like civilization as well.
But okay, in fairness though, but
they don't know that a washing machine is coming 100 years later. They have no clue about that.
At that time, it was, because think about it. 50 years before them or 100 years before them, they are thinking, I'm not going back and living back then.
Right, exactly. I'm not.
They have the same thought.
I can wash my clothes in a tub in my house. I don't have to walk to the river.
To the river, right.
Right. This is, and so the what happened during the 20th century was we had explosions that occurred in the progress of our technological tool making. Yeah. I mean, we went from Kitty Hawk in 1906, yeah, somewhere around there, to like going to the moon in 1969.
Right.
That's insane. That doesn't happen in general. That doesn't happen in the history of the world. I mean, we went from being on farms and understanding everything about agriculture for 5,000 years to, in 300 years, 250 really, industrializing almost everything in the Western world. That's just nuts. Mm-hmm. That's a compression of speed of technology based on what we could do, which, by the way, is what's freaking us all out right now with AI, because we just went through the thing we call AI. We just went through all of this compression within the Industrial Revolution, and then we went through the compression with tech, with the computers and all of that, and now we're getting ready to go through another compression, and it's speeding up. That's at least it feels like to us that it's speeding up. That's the part that's freaking us out, I think, which is why leadership is important. I always have to say that at the end, because that's what'll get you through that. No, Winona Ryder, come on now. Don't dodge the question. Talk about the movie. Come on. You like the movie? I watched the trailer for the movie before, because that's been years. It came out in 1994. The movie adaptation of Little Women.
The new one with Emma Watson came out in 2019. There was a newer version.
I didn't even know that you could even get. So I was reading this book and I thought they can't possibly make this movie today. Like, they couldn't possibly turn this into a film. Like, how would it? But apparently I was wrong. So all right.
2019, Emma Watson. So no, I think this is the first actual memory I have is from Winona Ryder in an actual movie. I don't know if she did a movie before this, but it's the first memory I have of her in a movie. And I just remember thinking, oh, she's really cool. And she was like 20 something when she did this, right? Like 22, 23 years old.
Yeah, something like that.
This movie.
Yeah.
So I just thought
she's now seen a few summers herself.
Yeah, exactly. I will say though, if she was 23 when she did this movie, she is a little older than me, so I'll just leave it at that. Not by a lot, but she's a little older than me. Anyway, again, you're right. I saw the movie. I have to admit, when I was asked to go watch the movie by my spouse, I said, are you out of your mind? What would make you think I would want to see this movie? Again, I was 20 some 20 years old, something like that. And a guy, by the way. So like, I was thinking to myself, fine. It was one of those like, okay, I'm handcuffed, like
Yeah, they can do this
take
movie.
me to the movie. I was pleasantly surprised. I thought the movie was good. I thought the if they now again to your point, I didn't read the book, so I don't know how close, because that's the whole book movie thing, right? Like that everyone
Right.
talks
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
The books are always so much better than the movies. Well, today anyway. Back a while back, the movies and books were pretty darn close.
Hmm.
So we didn't have the same issues where people are writing 700-page books and turning it into an hour and 20-minute movie. Like
Well, well, and when you look
it's
at Little Women, how it's written, the structure of it, it's structured, at least the first, I would say, 10 to 12 chapters are structured based on dialogue alone.
right.
Like there's very little description. So she wrote it to be, well, they didn't know the word cinematic because they didn't have cinema, but she wrote it to be driven
She was
by,
thinking play, right? They
right.
could turn
Yeah.
this into a play at
Right.
that time frame. Like she was thinking, I could see people acting this out. They
Right.
still had actors back then. They were just
Yeah.
on stage and not on screen. So I agree with you. I think that there's a part of it that she was thinking, I have to write this in a way that somebody could act this out. Like somebody could
Right.
actually showcase what I'm thinking and feeling from the writing. So, but I think that they did that really well in the 1994 movie. I think
Yeah.
Winona Ryder was awesome, and I think it definitely launched her career for sure. I think she became more and more popular at that point.
Yeah. So Reality Bites came out in 92.
Yeah, but that wasn't.
Stop it. You be quiet. You be quiet, sir. And then Heather's, which was I'll pull the Joe Rogan. I'm just gonna look it up because I don't remember when Heather's came out. Heather's was, let's see. This is the sound of me looking this up.
1988.
Yes, 1988. Thank you. Yes. Which, that goober Christian Slater, who, by the way, he has become a very goobery fellow. He really has. Like, I'm not gonna. Something happened to him. He just became weird. Anyway, doesn't matter. Point is, so Heather's is 88, which Winona Ryder fans will say that really was the film that cemented her in the public zeitgeist. And I think Little Women was one of those scripts that kind of just came to her because she was the hot it girl, at that time, or the hot it actress. I shouldn't say girl, but the hot it actress at that time. Just like with the Little Women that came out in 2019, me looking this up with, yes, you are correct, Emma Watson, something Ronan. I don't know. I can't pronounce her first name. It doesn't matter. And Florence Pugh, who I'm not a giant fan of. And then that fellow Timothy with two E's and a little umlaut over one of his E's.
Timothy Chalamet. Yeah.
Chalamet, whatever. Anyway. And then Meryl Streep as Aunt March. Nice to see Meryl Streep getting work.
So you can't have anything against Meryl Streep. Come on, dude.
we literally just covered Baroness Karen Blixen's work last episode. In 105, you should go back and listen to that. 7 Gothic Tales. Fun fact about Karen Blixen: she was a Danish aristocrat, basically, who moved to Nairobi, Kenya, with her first husband, who turned out to be a philanderer and a cheat in Africa, which is interesting. During the colonial period of European expansion, and she wrote about.
Hold on. Let me get the surprise. Wait, there was somebody from Europe that went to Africa and was disingenuous? No. Let me show you my shocked face.
I'm about to lay something else on you about the Baroness Karen Blixen.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So her husband was not only unfaithful, but her husband also passed on to her the glorious disease of syphilis. which she had for she claimed she had for the remainder of her life, but actually she might have just had an autoimmune disease that came about because of the mercury they used to cure her syphilis. Right. Still a baroness, by the way, still a baroness. And she wrote about all of her experiences and put it in her second book, which was called Out of Africa, which was nominated for Best Picture in like 1984 and Best Director. And the woman who portrayed the Baroness, Karen Blixen, Isaac Dennison was her pen name, was Meryl Streep. Six pixels of film separation here on the podcast.
Yeah, right. Out of Africa to Little Women. We got it.
We got it in there. We got not 6 pixels, sorry, 6 degrees of separation. But yeah. So, okay. So, what about the powers of books and stories to create cultural memory? Because yes, I'm doing a book podcast for a whole, because nobody reads, right? Like trying to bring these books to people's attention, right? That's really the point of this podcast, is to bring these books to people's attention and to encourage literacy and to encourage literate behavior, right? Books were very powerful in creating cultural memory for a long stretch of our history, and it is only United States history, and it is only within recent times, I would say within the last 25 years, that reading has declined precipitously. But books create cultural memories. Like if you go and look at you and I were actually talking about this. I was looking at Pauline Kael, the critics Pauline Kael's reviews of films that she did. She had a long career, and in her critique of the film, she would note what the source material of the writing was. And 90% of the films that she reviewed that were made before, I would say, because she died in 1992 or in the early 90s. I won't say 1992, but she died in the early 90s. 90% of the films that she reviewed during her career came from a short story or a novel. They were adapted from some source material. So there was strong source material underneath that was supporting the development of this secondary material known as film, right? And by the way, we're seeing this currently today. So the show that's on Hulu, and I canceled Hulu, so I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot about it. Shogun.
I loved it.
Okay. It's based off the James Clavell book.
Clavell, yeah.
Right? Again, strong source material, right? And then you're building that secondary thing off of it. And now, of course, you'll probably have a Shogun podcast. That's going to be like the third thing out over there.
No, the Shogun podcast was corresponding with the episodes.
Oh, it was corresponding with the episodes. Okay.
They did a phenomenal job covering all the bases on this one. Like they really did the articles. There was a lot of writing about it as it was happening. There was a lot of information. So I remember the first Shogun that came out in 1980. I was just a kid at the time, but I didn't remember all the details of the actual show, but I remember that Shogun was a show back then. Yeah. And now you can't really find the original on it, but from what I'm reading and all the comparing and contrasting, that this version was enormously better, like night and day better.
That's what happens. You go back to the source material, right? We were just saying the book versus the movie kind of debate, right? Like which one's better? Okay. So I don't want to talk about which one's better, but I want to address the power of the book to create cultural memory. Is the internet, I'll frame it this way. I'll frame it as a counterfactual question. Is the internet going to create any cultural memory, or is it just going to destroy all of it? And we're just done. Like we're done creating cultural myths and memories.
I think it will change it, but not eliminate it. And what I mean by that is like, think about, okay, so Shogun was written in the mid 20th century. About 1600 Japan, right? So in Little Women, here's the difference. So in the middle of the 20th century, Clavell was able to do all the research, find all the information, and write a book based on the information that he found. Alcott or Louisa May Alcott lived it. I think that's going to be the difference, right? Like, so it's not that we're not going to be able to create the cultural memories based on it. It's just the cultural memory is going to be based on research instead of experience, right?
Well, and it's interesting that you point this out because Greta Gerwig, I forgot this, and then it clicked over in my head. But Greta Gerwig directed Little Women. Greta Gerwig was also the director of the Barbie movie.
Of the Barbie movie? Okay, so anyway, so, but that's my, I guess that's kind of my point, right? So people like her, they don't need to do all this cultural research in order to produce cultural memory, right? Which is what she's going to, Barbie's going to be one of those things. Little girls watching Barbie today are going to remember it 50 years from now, right? Like that, it's going to be an impact. Well, we think there's a possibility. Anyway, right? It was on the stage, Oscars, for crying out loud, right? Anyway, but sorry. There are some.
I love it that I dropped Greta Gerwig on you, and that just derails your entire thought process.
There are underlying themes in Barbie that are very important to society. There are underlying themes, but you have to look for them, and you have to really search. It's a reach, but whatever, right? Anyway, but I think that's where the paradigm shift is going to happen, right? I think it's going to be less about people writing. Think about who's writing about their experiences right now. It's the Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks of the world that's not so much like Louisa May Alcott was talking about her life, and we're looking at that life, romanticizing it about 200 years ago, or well, not quite 200, 150, 160 years ago. I don't think 160 years from now, people are going to be looking at Elon Musk the same way, or Mark Zuckerberg the same way, or Jeff Bezos the same way as we look at Louisa May Alcott. They're not. What we may see is maybe J.K. Rowling's, but the type of writing that she has is not that. Those aren't going to be cultural memories. Those are going to be because like the kids today who are in their mid to late 20s who read the Harry Potters of the world growing up, that's cultural memory. That's fine. But the subject matter of that book is not going to create 150 years from now cultural memories, because these people will be gone. They'll be dead and gone, right? So it's not going to be the same way. I think some of those days are gone, I guess is what I'm getting at. So like people, I can't remember the author's name, but the person who wrote like The Outsiders, right? Like they grew up in the 70s. The gang environment in the 70s was very different than it is today. But the book and the movie, The Outsiders, could potentially be that in 150 years, where it's cultural memory, where like that. So sure, because the guy lived in that era, he understood that era. Like where Shogun was more research, and I think more of that is going to start happening. That we're going to have research and research and cultural memory based on that type of research than it is actual experience.
Well, The Outsiders was directed by Francis Ford Coppola,
right?
Whose daughter and son, daughter Sofia Coppola, also worked with Greta Gerwig and gave her shot. So now you can go from The Outsiders to Little Women to the Barbie movie, all in one fell swoop. All right, here we go.
Read on, fearless leader. Read on.
By the way, what lessons should leaders? No, this is actually a last legitimate question, because we do have to move forward here. We are going to kind of get a little bit bogged down here, so got to rescue the narrative from itself. What can leaders take from that, though? Like if I'm in an organization, and organizations do function, institutions do function under cultural myths. We don't like to talk a lot about it because it kind of makes us feel icky as Americans, but it's true. Like, this is why we cover the Constitution on our podcast, because it creates not only cultural myths, but it's also the story. It's part of the framework of the story of America. And you have to know what the framework is. That way you can lead inside of that framework. If you don't want to lead inside that framework, then we have to have a different kind of conversation. right? How can leaders, lead in a place where, or lead from a space where where the cultural artifacts are built on research, not a myth making kind of thing, because our natural tendency is to make myths, not to do research. The way to think scientifically, that's a in the course of human life, that is a human civilization, that is a radically recent invention.
Well, just remember too, it's you're thinking scientifically to be creative. It's almost like a cause and effect thing, right? It's not
Right.
like it's not like you're thinking science and like research is dictating. Research doesn't tend or doesn't have to dictate the writing. Creativity can still dictate the writing. So in the same sense, the research doesn't have to dictate the leadership or the leadership style. It just has to be there for foundational purposes, number one, or number two. And I literally yesterday, I know it was Sunday, for those of you listening, we record this on a Monday. Yesterday was Sunday. Oh, you made reference to Mother's Day yesterday. So anyway, I had a very long conversation with the head of the history department at a local university here. Him and I, we've known each other a long time. I bumped into him in the supermarket. We were having this very long conversation, and I'll circle this back. The reason why I brought him up was we were talking about why have we not, with all of the research that we have available to us, with all of the data that we have available to us, why have we not figured out a way to stop history from repeating itself over and over and over again?
Oh, wow.
We still have this problem today. We still have this problem. And by the way, just pick a facet of life. It doesn't even matter. Like him and I we were halfway joking and halfway serious about like, well, the way that people view marriage and the way that people view war and the way that people view famine and the way these things have all been cyclical over the course of the 5,000 years of history of human written history. But yet how is it even remotely possible that we have not figured out a way to stop this cycle of happening? It's fascinating to me. It blows my mind every time I think about it. And to have somebody of his authoritative value, and I say authoritative value because the university that I'm talking about is a very big university, and he is the head of the history department. This is a man who knows what he's talking about when it comes to history, and he has not been able to figure it out. So
I might have an answer for him. I might have a thought. But I'm going to hold that question for our next segment. So back to the book, back to Little Women, back to this cultural artifact. Well, yes, this cultural myth of Little Women. We're going to move forward, or actually move backward a little bit. And we're going to talk about we're going to talk about a letter that they received, because men are not really, other than Lawrence, are not featured highly in prominently in Little Women because it is focused on women. But there is a man who is missing from the narrative. And by the way, a book was written about him recently by an author who looked at this book and said, hey, there's something missing here. And then she crafted a narrative. It's very interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next section here. So back to the book, back to Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I'm going to pick up here with this piece here. Well, dearies, how have you got on today? There was much to do getting the boxes ready to go tomorrow that I didn't come home to dinner. Has anyone called, Beth? How is your cold, Meg? Joe, you look tired to death. Come and kiss me, baby. While making these maternal inquiries, Mrs. March got her wet things off, her warm slippers on, and sitting down in the easy chair, drew Amy to her lap, preparing to enjoy the happiest hour of her busy day. The girls flew about trying to make things comfortable, each in her own way. Meg arranged the tea table. Joe brought the wood and set chairs, dropping, overturning, and clattering everything she touched. Beth trotted to and fro between parlor kitchen, quiet and busy, while Amy gave directions to everyone as she sat with her hands folded. As they gathered about the table, Mrs. March said, with a particularly happy face, I've got a treat for you after supper. A quick, bright smile went round like a streak of sunshine. Beth clapped her hands, regardless of the biscuit she held, and Joe tossed up her napkin, crying, a letter, 3 cheers for father. Yes, a nice long letter. He is well, and he thinks he shall get through the cold season better than we feared. He sends all sorts of loving wishes for Christmas and a special message to you girls, said Mrs. March, patting her pocket as if she had a treasure there. Hurry and get done. Don't stop to quirk your little finger and simper over your plate, Amy, cried Jo, choking on her tea and dropping her bread butter side down on the carpet in her haste to get at the tree. Beth ate no more, but crept away to sit in her shadowy corner and brood over the delight to come till others were ready. I think it's so splendid in father to go as a chaplain when he was too old to be drafted and not strong enough for a soldier, said Meg warmly. Don't I wish I could go as a drummer, a vivon, what's his name, or a nurse so I could help him and be near him, exclaimed Jo with a groan. It must be very disagreeable to sleep in a tent and eat all sorts of bad tasting things and drink out of a tin mug, sighed Amy. When will he come home, Army? Asked Beth with a little quiver in her voice. Not for many months, dear, unless he is sick. He will stay and do his work faithfully as long as he can, and we won't ask for him back a minute sooner than he can be spared. Now come and hear the letter. They all drew to the fire, Mother in the big chair with Beth at her feet, Meg and Amy perched on either arm of the chair, and Jo leaning on the back where no one could see any sign of emotion if the letter should happen to be touching. Very few letters are written in those hard times that were not touching, especially those which fathers sent home. In this one, little was said of the hardships endured, the dangers faced, or the homesickness conquered. It was a cheerful, hopeful letter, full of lively descriptions of camp life, marches, and military news, and only at the end did the writer's heart overflow with fatherly love and longing for the little girls at home. Give them all of my dear love and a kiss. Tell them I think of them by day, pray for them by night, and find my best comfort in their affection at all times. A year seems very long to wait before I see them, but remind them that while we may all work so that these hard days need not be wasted, I know they will remember all that I said to them, and they will be loving children to you, will do their duty faithfully, fight their bosom enemies bravely, and conquer themselves so beautifully that when I come back to them, I may be fonder and prouder than ever of my little women. Everyone sniffed when they came near to that part. Jo wasn't ashamed of the great tear that dropped off the end of her nose, and Amy never minded the rumpling of her curls as she hid her face on her mother's shoulders and sobbed out, I'm a selfish girl, but I'll truly try to be better so he mayn't be disappointed in me by and by. We all will, cried Meg. I think too much of my looks and hate to work, but I won't anymore if I can help it. I'll try and be what he loves to call me, a quote-unquote little woman, and not be rough and wild, but do my duty here instead of wanting to be somewhere else, said Jo, thinking that keeping her temper at home was a much harder task than facing a rebel or two down south. Beth said nothing, but wiped away her tears with a blue army sock and began to knit with all her might, losing no time in doing the duty that lay nearest to her, while she resolved in her quiet little soul to be all that father hoped to find her when the year brought round the happy coming home. So there's a couple different things going on in here, and there's a reason I picked that section of the book to read. But I want to address a couple of things, sort of set the table for how we're going to talk about this, I think. I don't know where Tom hangs out. He probably hangs out at different places than I do on the internet because the internet is vast and gigantic and we all hang out in different places. I learned that during COVID. We're all using the internet for different things, apparently. And I found out during COVID that I had no idea what people were using the internet for. They weren't apparently using it for the same things I was, which is always a fascinating thing to find out about your neighbor. Anyway, some of the places where I hang out on the internet, some of the more darker corners, the more doom and gloom corners, are engaged in a whole lot of, and it's been this way for a while, for at least, I would say, 8 years, maybe 10, a lot of casual talk on both the political right and the political left in the United States about the potential for a second civil war during our current fourth turning, our current seculum. Matter of fact, I just read an article the other day before I wrote this script where a guy who was a former military guy was speculating on the death toll of a second civil war in America. And he speculated that about 100 million people would have to be carried off in order to make that work out of a population of 312 million. Right. And I read articles like that written by people who do have certain expertise in certain areas and may have seen different things than what I have seen and lived a different life than what I've lived. And I'll give them their druthers for sure. But I will say this. We are so far away from the last war on our soil, 160 years ago, that we have forgotten the real human impacts of war on family and culture. And our almost too casual conversation reveals this level of unseriousness in our experience. And that part irks me greatly. It's one thing to watch it on television or watch it on YouTube and see it happen someplace else. It's quite another to have 1 out of every 3 people that you know just get carted off. And by the way, he speculated that wouldn't just be from bullets. He thought it would be from famine and disease and everything else that goes along when you open up a can of, well, that on each other. And by the way, with all this talk, again, casual conversation, far too casual for my taste anyway, one of the questions that's never asked or answered is this one. Why would anybody from one place in this country march to another place in this country to do what exactly? What is the instigating act? What's the, to use the Latin term, casus belli? Why are we engaged in this process? And I can't think of one thing, even with our current political disagreements, that do lead to protest and sometimes even violence in small levels that would lead to catastrophic, apocalyptic levels of violence. But as my wife told me when I brought up this point to her, she said, I'm sure no average person in the run-up to the Civil War thought that that would lead to anything either. And it's not really there until it's there. Speaking of the Civil War, the generation that started, which was the Transcendental generation, and the generation that fought the Civil War, who were later known as the Gilded generation, in the fourth turning apocalypse of that Civil War, were totally burned out and rejected. Their position was totally burned out and rejected on much of anything by subsequent generations after the war was over. And they earned their just spiritual and moral and even political deserts from their material decisions, deciding to, as was said in the song of the time, trample out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. By the way, that song came out of Boston. That song came out of the Northeast, and the Yankee soldiers sang it as they marched down south. Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us, that's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show. One of the important things, and this gets to the history idea that Tom was just bringing up, one of the important things that we forget is that usually in every cycle, there's about 4 generations that are usually in the zeitgeist at the same time. with the exception of the Civil War cycle, where there were only 3 generations. That has been pretty much the standard in not only European-based cycles, but also American-based cycles for the last, at minimum, now almost 400 years, if you look at history. It's been pretty consistent in that way. And those 4 generations typically tend to balance each other out. And currently, we have 4 generations in our own fourth turning that we're in right now. And I think we're getting to the end of, as I've said repeatedly on this podcast, including the socially, culturally, and perhaps even spiritually ameliorating presence of the smallest generation, the generation that Tom and I belong to, the 13th generation. And all that crusading talk about war has very little practical action with us. And maybe we're the ones, for as small as we are, and we are the smallest of the 4 current generations, the boomers, the Gen Zers, and the millennials, the Gen Xers, Tom and my generation, we are the smallest at around, depending upon which number you look at, 25 to 35 million folks. That was the generation that was missing and died in the trenches, died in the trenches of World War I, but many of them died in the fields of the Civil War. And I do believe there's a reason for having 4 generations historically. We just don't understand why, because we're actually not that smart on some of those things, I think, or we just maybe haven't turned our minds to that sort of research. So when I read that letter from Father in Little Women, and he served as a chaplain, and you can read his entire tale of woe, well, most of his tale of woe in Little Women, at least from their perspective, you do understand the human consequences of civil war, or you begin to understand the human consequences of civil war. And there's a little section that we'll read here today as well, which reflects the pathologies of immigration during the Civil War that was also beginning to occur at that time. So for Tom, so with that ramble laid down, let's do this. Like I said, there's a lot of casual Civil War talk going on in our culture. Been going on for about the last 10 years. And by the way, when I was growing up, like, you whispered that, and now people are talking about it out loud. I mean, I see articles in the Atlantic and in the New York Times about this. This is nuts to me. How do we tamp this talk down? How do we stop people from even? It's like when every time Russia and the Ukraine gets brought up, nuclear war starts getting talked about. I'm like, why are we doing this? And I think we've had this conversation on this podcast before about that. I'm frustrated with that, but just focus on just America. Like, we can't come up. Not we can't. The consequences of us coming apart would be apocalyptic.
Well, let me just make one clarifying statement part of that.
Sure. Yeah.
The consequences of us coming apart violently would be apocalyptic. But
Yes.
if we were to come apart under like clear dividing channels, meaning like if we had, we're a country of 50 states. If 20 of those states decided to collectively secede from our union, and it was all agreed upon that it was for the betterment of both parties, meaning both the new whatever, I'm not so sure it would be apocalyptic. I think it would be world changing. I think it would be very weird. I think the world would react to it, but I'm not sure it would be apocalyptic depending on how that happens. So to your point though, if it were to happen violently, I really do think, I think it would be catastrophic implications across the world. I really do feel strongly about that. I do think that would be it. Now, so how do we get this to stop? How do we get the conversations to stop?
Yeah, how do we switch the conversation from that to, hey, what's some ways maybe that we can actually figure out how to work together?
This comes at me in about 900 different ways. Really, because I think on the one hand, I think we don't stop talking about it. I think we talk about it more, but bring the conversation to that apocalyptic level, and then get people to understand that this should not happen. Like, the more you talk about it and the more you start showing them all of those detrimental things, nobody wins in this case. I don't care. Like, if you want to talk about our original Civil War, North, South, and if you want to claim the North won or whatever, I don't even care about that, because in this case, nobody would win, including the rest of the world. So
Oh no.
there's a portion of us that we should not stop the conversation about it and actually push the envelope of that conversation to force feed people to think about the end result. The other components of it, like I think if we point to the direction of maybe big business, pharma, like some of these big, because they would be hurt more than anybody if you think about it. Like giant companies, General Motors, Pfizer, all of these giant companies, they would get hit just as hard, if not worse, than anybody else on the planet. So maybe they take it from a business angle instead of looking at it from a social angle. Look at it from a business angle and look at it from like things like that. Like again, like I said to your point, I think 900 different ways this thing comes at me, and when I start thinking about this, and now mind you, let me just tell you, for the record, it's utterly ridiculous for us to even have this as like a remote possibility. Like, what are we thinking here, people? Really?
Because, well, I think what we're thinking, and I'm glad you asked that. Here's what I think we're thinking. The leadership over the last 25 years that we relied on to provide answers to the most problematic, to use a term that's used now that I don't like, but the most problematic problems, the most like institutionally endemic problems, seems to have left the room. Like, okay, so I'll make it very blunt. The thing that would take the entire country down as an entity together is the debt.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Really, we are the most indebted country in the history of the world. And by the way, we have been under both. And again, this is not a Republican or Democrat problem, because it's not a presidential problem. It's a uniparty problem. Yes, I did use that word, uniparty. It's both of them together under both Trump, actually, not even Trump, going back to Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and now Joe Biden. And it may be Donald Trump again, or it may not. It may be RFK Jr. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Point is, under the current presidents that we've had, who we've elected as leaders, and by the way, the people in Congress we've elected who have the power of the purse, the president doesn't have that.
Right.
Under our system, it's the Congress. Just keep voting to print more money. What the actual hell? And I'm not even talking about the Fed. I haven't even brought in the Federal Reserve. Like, there seems to be no adults in the room. And then from there, and I mentioned this a couple of years ago on the podcast, like from there, you go to any other place in culture, and it seems like adults have abandoned the room. And that's the thing we're frustrated by, I think. And so when all the adults abandon the room and the children are running the institutions, and the children are running when the inmates are running the asylum, all kinds of craziness gets to pop up. And when no one says no, we're not doing that. When no one says, no, I have a vision for going this way, when that's not offered, then people go to the next logical thing, which is, well, why am I hanging around with these people that I can't get along with? I need to separate from them.
I still have a hard time making the leap from that national debt piece to civil war, right? Like,
well, the national debt piece will take us down collectively together. There's no way out of that, right? But the other things that come off of the lack of leadership on the national debt piece translate to a lack of leadership other places. So, for instance, if I can't even get a person in Congress to propose a budget, instead they just continue to pass resolutions to continue to fund the government, but they don't come to me and say, this is why we're passing the resolution. Instead, they just do it at midnight on December 31st, as they have traditionally done, with no budget. I look at that as the average person, and then I'm told that we are 7 trillion or 8 trillion or 23 trillion in debt. And I go, what are we doing here? Where's the leadership? And by the way, most average people just go, where's the leadership? And then they apply that question to everywhere. Which is why we do this podcast. If there's no leadership, why am I hanging around? Why am I hanging around? Why do I need to hang out here? Now, there may be parts and I will admit, there may be parts of this explanation that I'm filling in with things that I know that you don't know, and so whatever. And then this is not a political podcast. I'm just using this as an example. We could even go to cultural stuff. Okay, if I can't figure out a way to culturally get along with the person next door to me, or whatever, or if it's just easier to engage in a flame war on Facebook or whatever than it is for me to like my neighbor. And no one's coming down saying, hey, don't do a flame war on Facebook. No one's coming down saying that. Or I shouldn't say no one. It has taken almost almost 20 years of Facebook for people to finally wake up and go, oh, hey, Jonathan Haidt. Oh, hey, this might be a bad thing. We might want to not do this. And even then, it's sort of lukewarm leadership. Instead of someone saying, no, you can't have this, or no, you shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, people who want it are, of course, going to reject that. They're going to rebel against it. But, people have always rebelled. Like, my kids rebel when I tell them, no, don't put a stick in your mouth. But it doesn't mean I'm not going to tell them to put a stick. I mean, come on. I'm not going to let my 7-year-old just eat a stick. Oh, it hurts his feelings. Well, but yeah, it's going to hurt the roof of his mouth more. And then I got to go to the hospital. There's so many of these different areas in the country. I think that people get frustrated and they just go, well, separation is the best way to go. Which, by the way, I don't agree with that from a whole bunch of other different areas. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's where you should go. And I think that a lot of people have gone to, a lot of governors in particular, I find it interesting that politically, when the parties shift in Washington, D.C., all of a sudden, the opposite political party in individual states all of a sudden discover that there's a 10th Amendment in the Constitution and that states have rights and can do stuff. And then they start doing stuff. We'll have this again. If Donald Trump gets elected, California will all of a sudden discover that there's a 10th Amendment.
Oh, Massachusetts too. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. They'll be like, oh my God, there's this amendment. And we didn't know that. And that's what frustrates people. I don't need you to discover it when the opposite political party is in power. I need you to discover it when your political party is in power.
Right.
That's when I need you to discover it. I need you to discover it when it's quote unquote working for you, but it's exploding the national debt.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not really sure how to respond to this one. Just because, listen, I've said 1,000 times, right? And so to your point about having no adults in the room, I see weird things in the political landscape where the younger generation who has, to your point, we're the smallest generation, right? So the younger generation has the highest voting power,
mm-hmm.
or the strongest voting power, but yet votes the least.
Right.
They have the ability to literally change the dynamics of the landscape of our entire country, but they don't. I don't understand that part of it. They do almost 100% of the complaining.
Right.
But 0% of the action.
Right.
They don't find their voting, let's say their voting feet. They don't find their voting appetite until they're in their 30s. Right. And then they're no longer that youngest generation.
Right.
But now they're a generation that has kids and jobs and tax, and they care about all this stuff. So now they're trying to weigh the balances of, do I want higher taxes and more government involvement, or do I want lower taxes, less government involvement? Do I want social reform? Do I not care about it doesn't come back, it doesn't really truly hit you until you're in your 30s.
Well, this is why we should raise the voting age and lower the drinking age.
Yes, I'm good with that. Yeah, I'm actually good with that.
And I'm not saying lower the drinking age to whatever. No, lower the drinking 18. Age like 18, right? We're not Europeans. You don't need to be drinking wine when you're 14.
Right,
okay.
Exactly.
No, 18, lower the drinking age, but raise 25. The voting age. No, 30. I would raise the voting age to 30.
I say 30 is the goal, but you hit 25 first to test the waters to see how it goes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll go halfway with you on that.
Take one step at a time. But to your point, I had somebody tell me once when I was young that if you are older and liberal, no, sorry. If you are young and there was a way he phrased it to make it make
Yeah.
sense. If you are young and conservative, you have no heart. If
Yep.
you are old and liberal, you have no brain.
Yep.
Like,
That was Winston Churchill.
but that's because, well, he was quoting him then,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it was not Winston Churchill said it to me, and that's the only time I remember it was this one particular guy saying it to me. And at the time, I was probably about 26 or 27 years old, and he was probably about 55.
Hmm.
I was at the very beginning of my sales career, and he was at the end, toward the end of his sales career. And he
Yeah.
said that to me, and I was like, it didn't hit me until maybe 10 years ago when I was like, oh damn, that makes sense. Like, and I'm not talking about, like, when he says if you're old and liberal, you have no brain, he's not talking about not caring about social reform or not care.
Right.
Talking about if you go so far to the left that you don't care about your own money, then you're crazy. And the government should feel the same way. That was
Right.
basically what he was thinking. So to your point, I'm not suggesting, and again, this is not I don't even know how, God, I'm not sure how this relates to Little Women. But anyway, we'll get back to
Well,
that.
you go.
But
It's a Civil War thing. So yeah.
Civil War, yeah. But it does get to a point where you wonder, does the government care so much about one particular topic? I don't care if it's
Sure.
social reform, military, whatever. Pick your poison. But does the government care too much about one particular topic that they're overspending without thinking? Right? Like that.
Yeah.
To your point about the debt, like it's, and then I don't know. I remember.
Well, and not only with the debt, but also with how do we get out of it? This is the question that everybody wants. How do we get out of the? And actually, I won't even make it about the debt. I'm going to make it way larger. I'm going to bring the microscope back into a telescope. Right? How do we get out of the problems we're in right now? Because we've got problems everywhere. So we've got challenges between people of different races. We've got on the cultural level. We've got social media that's being used not only to spread propaganda and, as the government says, disinformation, but also is not allowed to be a Wild West where everybody can just say anything short of crying fire in a crowded theater, because it benefits the big corporations, and Facebook and Google and Microsoft are big corporations that want to make money off of outrage and clicks and ads. Okay, then by the way, those are just two problems right there. And those problems then mold into each other. Then we've got the problem of forget national debt. Personal credit card debt is the highest it's ever been because inflation is through the roof, because we printed a bunch of money during COVID to pay people to stay at home and to shelter in place. And we can argue about whether or not that was good or bad or whatever, but that's what we did. Then number 4, we've still got people running around in masks. We've still got people who are afraid of COVID, and no one's calmed their fears. I've just named 4 big things right there: COVID, personal debt, credit card debt, and inflation, social media outrage machines, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, or just issues of race between people of different races versus people of different classes. 4 things. No, I don't hear any leadership talking about it. We're going to talk about this today because I want our podcast to be about that. How do we get out of any of those? What's the way forward? Don't just tell me, oh, well, we just have to get through it. What's the vision of the future? What does America look like in 2030? Describe that so that the average plumber who's got $16,000 in debt and feels like he will never be able to work his way out of it on his Discover card because he's just trying to make groceries every week, he understands it. Explain it. And that's what I think people are missing.
Yeah,
we know what the problems are, but we have 0 people proposing solutions.
That I can't even argue with that. I agree with that 100%. Have you ever seen the movie Wag the Dog?
Oh yeah.
Because I think that's half of what our problem is, by the way.
Yeah,
I really do. If you think about this, what the hot spot or the hot topic changes based on the pulse of the country, right? Like, so
right.
We're the dog being wagged by our tails here.
Mm-hmm.
So like, if we get enough people to be worried and want to focus on it. My daughter just brought this up to me yesterday, as a matter of fact. We were talking about like the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff like that, and how you haven't heard anything from it.
Nothing.
Where is the momentum that grew? Like, there was really, and I mean, I was actually hopeful that this was the time. The Rodney King stuff, All that stuff was the precursor to what the BLM movement was going to be able to accomplish that none of the rest of them were. And now nothing happened. And I think this is kind of par and parcel for the course here, where the powers that be do a really good job keeping us distracted with what they want us to think is important at the time. Right now, it's all these. Right now, we're talking about these protests on college campuses, but what we're not talking about is what the actual problem is over in Gaza and Israel.
Oh yeah, no.
Nobody's trying to solve that problem. The real problem is these kids protesting on the campuses. Come on. Like, why are we being distracted with this? This is a simple thing. This is like these. And then, by the way, by a year ago, to your point, or a little while ago, it was Ukraine and the possibility of nuclear war. But nobody's talking about Ukraine right now. And they're still at war, by the way. Like, they're still blowing stuff up over there.
And we keep voting to send them more money.
Right. But nobody's talking about it. And why? This is my last, like, one of the most fundamental things I don't understand. And this is where I started heading this way a little while ago when I said, when I was starting to talk about all these young kids that are protesting on these college campuses, how many of them actually went out and vote? How many of them are going to vote in the next election? They protest, but they don't. I'm not suggesting that protesting is not a good action, because Martin Luther King would raise out of his grave and smack me right in the head. I'm not suggesting protests are not a path. But what I am suggesting is that these groups of protests are not doing anything. These guys are not marching on Washington. They're not they're not. It's so frustrating. This type of protest is not actionable. Go vote, for Christ's sakes. Like, go vote, right? Like, you're gonna do this. You're gonna complain that the police are removing you from a peaceful protest. You're gonna complain that the police are arresting people. You're gonna complain and complain, but not actually do the function that makes a difference, which is at the ballot box. Right? Like,
right.
So it frustrates the hell out of me, number one. So, but my point to all of that rant was the fact that we're so focused on the four you just talked about. DEI was huge a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. No one's really talking about it anymore. All the national debt only comes up when we talk about the budget, like when we have to pass that resolution real quick because we're going to shut down the government. You know what? Shut down the government.
Shut down the government.
Shut it down.
Shut it down.
Because the state governments operate independently. I know the state of Massachusetts, where I live, is going to be fine if you shut down the federal government. We're not going to lose any sleep over this. Like, which, by the way, Charlie Baker, who was just left our governorship, has been begged to run for president, and he refuses because he does not want any of that shit show. Like, so now, mind you, between Charlie Baker and the three governors before him, they have done Massachusetts last year. Every resident who paid taxes last year, every single resident got money back outside of their tax return.
Wow.
Because we had a surplus of tax money, and that was one of Charlie Baker's promises. If we get to a point of surplus, I'm going to give the money back to you. And he did. Every taxpayer, and it was based on a percentage of whatever money you paid, whatever. But I got an extra, I forget, it was like $500. It's not going to make or break me, but that's not the point. It was the principle of it, right?
Yeah.
It was the principle of it. He made a promise to his voters. He ran the state government well enough that we had a surplus of money, and he gave back the money because that was what he promised to do. And by the way, he also Massachusetts, by the way, which everybody knows our nickname, right? Taxachusetts. he was actually able to lower two of our main taxes because of this surplus. He took the tax rate and lowered it.
May I also point out that Charlie Baker is currently the president of the NCAA. So actually, I now know who to blame about that. But anyway, I now know who to have a conversation with about that.
But he's also a Republican.
A Republican in Massachusetts.
Running a Democratic state, right? A Republican. Now, think about this. All the Massachusetts is 88% Democrat registered voters, 88%, and a Republican won the governorship. By the way, he was reelected. So he was reelected by a Democratic state. Now, everybody in the state, we're like, we need this guy to run for president because he's
Hmm.
he's a good balance of Republican financial responsibility and Democratic social mindedness.
Okay.
He doesn't want to change everything socially. He doesn't
Yeah.
think everything that we throw at him, from LGBTQ to DEI to all that, he doesn't think all of it is worth it, but he's at least willing to listen.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
and yeah,
And so
and he
this goes back to my assertion about adults in the room.
right, but
Like,
he refuses to run because he wants no part of that shit show in DC.
right. And so this is the thing. So one of the fundamental pieces, and he was born in Elmira. That's amazing. Okay. Elmira, New York. That's astonishing. I used to drive through Elmira, New York. I had clients in Elmira, New York. That's wow. Okay. Um, you point out guys like this. So Charlie Baker, or say what you want about him, Ron DeSantis in Florida. Like he's doing what people in Florida think is best for people in Florida. Or Greg Abbott in Texas, or Gavin Newsom. As much as I am not a gigantic fan of Gavin Newsom, he's doing what people in California like him. He's clearly working for the people of California, which is the point of what you're supposed to be doing. And if I don't like him, I don't have to live in California. That's the glory of the Republic. I know that there is leadership at the local level, or you at the small business level. I know there is. I know this exists. I know that there are competent, qualified leaders who can tamp down ridiculous talk and unite people together, regardless of whether they have an R or a D next to their name. I know this. I know it exists. What gets pushed is, to your point, maybe I can summarize it a little bit better. What gets pushed is chaos.
Yes.
Chaos gets pushed. And I've had about enough of that, because when you push chaos, people who are, I'm just going to be blunt about it, people who are psychologically weak-minded begin to coalesce together. And again, certain dark spots of the internet, and start having conversations they shouldn't be having. That, yeah, it may be a place where you can let off steam because maybe those conversations need to happen, to your point. But also, someone needs to come along and say to those people, stop. This is the thing that needs to happen, or this is the thing that is happening. By the way, I do agree with you that because of governors like Charlie Baker, or what's his name down in Virginia, or the governor, even Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York. Governors will always be the backstop on a lot of this nonsense from Washington, D.C., because governors have to get reelected in their own state. And the cobblers together of our Constitution knew something fundamental about human nature. They knew that the government which governs best is the one that governs the most locally, not nationally, locally. And so if the Republic were to come apart, it would come apart in localities that would be self-serving for their own state, which that might create friction and problems. But I don't know that it would create friction and problems to the point of violence. I'm not convinced. I'm just still not convinced of that.
I'm not convinced of that either.
I'm not convinced of that no, I'm just not. So it doesn't,
but
I don't think we're there yet.
But can we say for the record that we have 300 and whatever? Let's just say I thought it was 350, 312, whatever. Let's just say we have 300 million people in this country, and these are the two best people that we can find to run for president. I find that is an absolute atrocity.
But we've been saying that same line going all the way back to Herbert Walker Bush.
Yeah.
We've come to that same conclusion collectively, left, right, and center.
I'm not sure. When Barack Obama ran against Mitt Romney, that was probably the first time in a long time that we had two candidates that were probably both worth it on their respective parties.
Well, what about John McCain?
I see. He's like the old regime kind of person, though. That's what I was thinking.
Okay, I'll
Like,
grant you that. I'll grant you that. And by the way, I was no, I was no fan of John McCain. I'll grant you that. But no one would say that he was unqualified. People just said it, just like they did with Hillary Clinton. They said
right,
it's his turn.
right. Yeah,
You
I agree.
know,
Yeah, and that we don't want somebody that it's their turn. We want somebody we want to be there.
right. And this
Like,
is so. This is why I think we're on the backside of our seculum cycle. I think we're on the backside of the cycle because the kinds of conversation that you and I are having and that folks are listening to indicates that we are at an end of an era, not an end of a civilization. And I think that that's where people who are talking about the Civil War talk or who are releasing movies called Civil War, like, come on, let's stop, people. Like those kinds of those kinds of cultural whack-a-mole things that are popping up, I think people are confused. It's the end of an era of a certain type of competence, an end of an era of a certain type of leadership, the end of an era of a certain type of bigness or a certain type of smallness. The parties are shifting around. Most people don't know this, but for better or worse, Donald Trump got more of the black vote in both 2016 and the 2020 election than any Republican at a national level in the history of the Republican Party, going all the way back to like the pre-civil rights era. That's insane. No one ever talks about it out loud because it's just too insane to even contemplate. And by the way, he actually successfully did something that no other Republican has ever done before. He split the black vote. More black males voted for Donald Trump and more black females voted for Joe Biden.
interesting.
And voted for Hillary Clinton. That tells you that the electorate is shifting around. Down in the state where I live, so I live in Texas. In the state where I live, Hispanics, particularly Hispanics that are, you talk about younger Hispanics that are second and third generation from immigration that occurred in the 1980s, overwhelmingly are breaking for Trump right now. Overwhelmingly.
Really?
Yep, overwhelmingly. It has the Texas Democrat Party in a cold panic.
Interesting.
This is unprecedented because we're at the end of an era of competency. We're at the end of an era of political parties. When you tell me that a Republican governor just got, I mean, not only got elected twice in deep blue Massachusetts, where there's 3 Republicans huddled in a room together somewhere in like the northwestern part of the state up near Rhode Island where they can all hide or something. I don't know. Like they're huddled in a corner somewhere. You're telling me that a Republican twice convinced Democrats to vote for him?
Well, don't forget that Mitt Romney was our governor before that. So that's another Republican. Yeah.
Right. But Mitt Romney's from a different era. I mean, that's Bain Capital. That's a little bit of different era. That's a little bit different era. Yeah. You're talking about, and this guy, Charlie Baker's only 67. That's insane.
Yeah.
That tells you that things are shifting around. And it's not just at the political level, it's also at the social level, which is also part of the chaos. It's at the cultural level, that's also part of the chaos. It's at the spiritual level, which is also part of the chaos. No one ever talks about it, but massive evangelical churches are beginning to break apart and have been for the last 10 years.
For sure.
To break it. And COVID actually accelerated a lot of that. And none of those people that are leaving those churches are going to even bigger churches, and nor are they creating bigger churches. What they're doing is they're creating much smaller churches in much more concentrated ways. So you talk about, particularly in the context of Little Women, you know, Louisa May Alcott wrote this underneath the spiritual aegis of the Second Great Awakening. I'm convinced that there is another awakening coming down the pipeline, but it's not going to look like the awakening we previously had, which occurred in the late 1960s and the 1970s in America. That was the Third Great Awakening in America. You're not going to have something that's going to look like that. It's going to look radically different because we're at the end of an era, not the end of a civilization. And I think we have to shift our thinking in order to talk about leadership differently in a different kind of era.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not going to argue with that, because we've already seen how you talked about the 4 generations living at the same time and all this
Yeah.
stuff. Like there's 3 of those generations are in the workforce, right? So
Right.
you have like the Gen Xers trying to manage and lead Gen Zers coming out of college right now.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is a recipe for disaster. Like,
Well,
but
it's what you
we've
got.
already we've already faced this. We've already faced this with the boomers trying to run the millennials and
Right.
the Gen Xers trying to run interference.
Right.
Right. So this is basically we're again this whole cyclical thing, right? So we're gonna have like these Gen Xers trying to run these Gen Zers, but the millennials are gonna run interference.
Oh yeah.
They're gonna be the ones. That's that like that missing link generation gap thing that
Mm-hmm.
we have going on here. But this has happened throughout history. We've seen this happen so many
Oh yeah.
times. But I think that I think the learning curves are getting shorter,
Okay.
right? So when the Gen Xers had to deal with the millennials coming in and the look at me, I win a trophy every time I play a sport, so you're gonna have to deal with this. Like, and then of course I'm the one looking at all of our peers going, "Hey, you created this monster. You were their
Yeah.
parents,
It's a you
so
problem.
I don't want to hear you complain about it, right? You got to figure out a way to how to help these guys realize, like I was the one, I was sitting in there anyway. But so now, like we're looking at this going, like these Gen Zers are there. It's it's almost like the Gen X looks at them like they have zero work ethic. They don't know and understand. They'll start a job and quit in a month because they don't like the way their boss spoke to them one day, right? Like they
Mm-hmm.
don't have this. And I said, I look at it and I went, just wait until they have real bills.
Right.
They're doing that now because they can. And you know what? Let them. Let them. I don't understand why you're fighting this. Let them, because you're going to go to the next one. At some point, you're going to hire the right person, and it's going to be great and grand and whatever. But you can't hire a 22, 23-year-old right out of college, expect them to have the same work ethic that you had when you left. It's not the same time. We don't think like that anymore. Like, but
So
I do think they will. They'll get there. Like I said, when they have real, these 22-year-olds are coming home and they're living at home for the next 4 years because they have astronomical student debt and all this other stuff that they have to deal with.
Mhm.
Once they figure out how to get that under wraps, then they start figuring out they want to go out on their own.
Well, we need a leader to explain to them how they're going to get it out of this. This is a leadership problem. I need a leader to rise and explain to me how you're going to walk out of that debt in real ways without appealing to the government to forgive it.
Yeah. I mean, I have, like I said earlier, I have one. My daughter graduates college next week, and
Mhm.
her and I have already sat down with her short-term goals, long-term goals. What is she going to do with this? Her student debt isn't outrageous. It's
Mhm.
more than I would like it to be, but it's not like it's not hundred, it's not six
Yeah.
figures.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but I expect her to pay it. I ain't paying it. She's paying it.
Right. Right.
So but we've already sat down more than once. We sat down. We're talking about this. What is your like? So for the next, she's going to come home for the next X amount of years. She's going to do this. This is how you knock down that debt. Once you get to this point, you start looking to move on and move out, right? Like move on into your own stuff. We are basically we are forcing this generation to delay their actual lives because of this student debt. If you do it right, you just come home, you pay it off, you move on. Like
Mhm.
if you do it right. The problem is nobody's doing that. Nobody's advising kids to do that. They're basically saying you're 22, you're on your own, go do your thing. And that's why they're not being able to pay these debts. They're not nobody's teaching them financial literacy. And they're not getting it from school. And I don't know why their parents aren't teaching them, but me and my kids sit and talk about finances all the time. So
As do I in my house. And back to the book. Back to Little Women. We've kind of gone a little bit far afield, but that's okay because I recommend you go out and pick up the book. By the way, the copy that I have is a lovely open source version of Little Women, and so you can find Little Women on the Internet Book Archive. You can find it in a bunch of different other open source spots. And so, yeah, I'd recommend you go and pick it up. It has entered the public zeitgeist, and has created, just a whole lot of different places for us to have conversation and have chats. By the way, that the father in Little Women, um, look this up on Google. Hold on a second. Who was the chaplain? There was a book written about him. I did reference this earlier. Robert March, and the father was played by beep 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 beep. I can't remember who, and it doesn't matter. Bob Odenkirk. No, which is interesting. Bob Odenkirk in the 2019 version of Little Women. He was played by Bob Odenkirk, and after the war, he became a minister to a small congregation, because that's basically what he was. And there was a book written about him, and I'm looking through the Wikipedia currently, by can't find it right now, but I'm going to look it up. I did see it actually when I was researching Little Women, and researching this book for the podcast. But there was a book written about him by a contemporary author, I think a couple of years ago, who kind of fleshed out his backstory, because his backstory is not really gone into deeply here. Okay, back to the book, back to Little Women. We're going to pick up where they are. Oh yeah, they're at a party. So we're going to pick that up. All right. Down they went, feeling a trifle timid, for they seldom went to parties, and informal as this little gathering was, it was an event for them. Mrs. Gardner, a stately old lady, greeted them kindly and handed them over to the eldest of her 6 daughters. Meg knew Sally and was at ease very soon, but Jo, who didn't much care for girls or girlish gossip, stood about with her back carefully against the wall and felt as much out of place as a colt in a flower garden. By the way, before they go to this party, just as an interjection, before they go to this party, Louisa May Alcott describes their clothing, and the back of one of the dresses is actually burned, and so they're wearing secondhand clothing, they're wearing damaged clothing, they're trying to make it as good as they possibly can, because they're coming out of a place of need, because you have a civil war, your supply chains are disrupted, and this is during a time when you could raise everything literally on your own farm, and people were a lot more self-sufficient than they are now. That's sort of the reason why the descriptions are structured in the way they are in this particular piece of the book. All right, back to the book. Half a dozen jovial lads were talking about skates in another part of the room, and she longed to go and join them, for skating was one of the joys of her life. She telegraphed her wish to Meg, but the eyebrows went up so alarmingly that she dared not stir. No one came to talk to her, and one by one the group dwindled away until she was left alone. She could not roam about and amuse herself, for the burned breath would show, so she stared at people rather forlornly until the dancing began. Meg was asked at once, and the tight slippers tripped about so briskly that none would have guessed the pain their wearer suffered smilingly. Jo saw a big red-headed youth approaching her corner, and fearing he meant to engage her, she slipped into a curtained recess, intending to peep and enjoy herself in peace. Unfortunately, another bashful person had chosen the same refuge, for, as the curtain fell behind her, she found herself face to face with the quote-unquote Lawrence boy. "Dear me, I didn't know anyone was here," stammered Jo, preparing to back out as speedily as she had bounced in. But the boy laughed and said pleasantly, though he looked a little startled, "Don't mind me. Stay if you like." "Shan't I disturb you?" "Not a bit. I only came here because I don't know many people and felt rather strange at first, "So did I. Don't go away, please, unless you'd rather." The boy sat down again and looked at his pumps, till Jo said, trying to be polite and easy, "I think I've had the pleasure of seeing you before. You live near us, don't you?" "Next door." And he looked up and laughed outright, for Joe's prim manner was rather funny when he remembered how they had chatted about cricket when he brought the cat home. That put Jo at ease, and she laughed too, and she said in her heartiest way, "We did have such a good time over your nice Christmas present. Grandpa sent it. But you put it into his head, didn't you now?" How is your cat, Miss March? Asked the boy, trying to look sober while his black eyes shone with fun. Nicely, thank you, Mr. Lawrence, but I am not Miss March. I'm only Joe, returned the young lady. I'm not Mr. Lawrence. I'm only Laurie. Laurie Lawrence. What an odd name. My first name is Theodore, but I don't like it, for the fellows call me Dora, so I made them say Laurie instead. I hate my name, too. So sentimental. I wish everyone would say Joe instead of Josephine. How did you make the boys stop calling you Dora? I thrashed them. I can't. Well, they paused for just a moment. It turns out the male and female sexual politics are pretty much the same throughout time. Back to the book. I can't thrash Aunt March, so I suppose I shall have to bear it. And Joe resigned herself with a sigh. Don't you like to dance, Miss Joe? Asked Laurie, looking as if he thought the name suited her. I like it well enough if there is plenty of room and everyone is lively. In a place like this, I'm sure to upset something, tread on people's toes, or do something dreadful, so I keep out of mischief and let Meg sail about. Don't you dance? Sometimes. You see, I've been abroad a good many years and haven't been into company enough yet to know how you do things here. Abroad? Cried Joe. Oh, tell me about it. I love dearly to hear people describe their travels. Laurie didn't seem to know where to begin, but Joe's eager questions soon sent him going, and he told her how he had been to school in Vevey, where the boys never wore hats and had a fleet of boats on the lake, and for holiday fun went on walking trips about Switzerland with their teachers. Don't I wish I'd been there, cried Joe. Did you go to Paris? We spent last winter there. Can you talk French? We were not allowed to speak anything else at Vevey. You say some. I can read it, but I can't pronounce it. I can't read it either, but he's going to say something about something. How nicely you do it. Let me see. You said, who is the young lady in the pretty slippers, didn't you? This I can't say, though. Oui, mademoiselle. It's my sister Margaret, and you knew it was. Don't you think she's pretty? Yeah, she makes me think of the German girl. She looks so fresh and quiet and dances like a lady. Joe glowed with pleasure at this boyish praise of her sister and stored it up to repeat to Meg. Both peeped and criticized and chatted till they felt like old acquaintances. Laurie's bashfulness soon wore off, for Joe's gentlemanly demeanor amused and set him at his ease, and Joe was her merry self again, because her dress was forgotten and nobody lifted their eyebrows at her. She liked the Lawrence boy better than ever and took several good looks at him so that she might describe him to the girls, for they had no brothers, very few male cousins, and boys were almost unknown creatures to them. Curly black hair, brown skin, big black eyes, handsome nose, fine teeth, small hands and feet, taller than I am, very polite for a boy, and altogether jolly. Wonder how old he is. By the way, pause. That's an Instagram description. Again, nothing's changed. Our technology is just better. Back to the book. It was on the tip of Joe's tongue to ask, but she checked herself in time and with unusual tact tried to find out in a roundabout way. I suppose you're going to college soon. I see you pegging away at your books. No, I mean studying hard. And Joe blushed at the dreadful pegging which had escaped her. Laurie smiled, but he didn't seem shocked and answered with a shrug. Not for a year or two. I won't go before 17 anyway. Aren't you but 15? Asked Joe, looking at the tall lad whom she imagined 17 already. 16 next month. How I wish I was going to college. You don't look as if you liked it. I hate it. Nothing but grinding or skylarking. And I don't like the way fellows do either in this country. What do you like? To live in Italy and to enjoy myself in my own way. I was going to talk about one thing, but I'm going to talk about something else. So, it turns out that men and women still meet each other the exact same way, even in our era. It also turns out that the conversation is probably the most important part of the mating ritual. And yes, we do it on Tinder and Grindr and OnlyFans and Instagram Reels and all this other nonsense these days. But if you took away all of that stuff, the much talked about Gen Zers, who, by the way, are apparently engaged, according to statistics, in the least amount of sexual behavior, both men and women, of any generation in the last 4 generations of American history, apparently are struggling with, and we need to teach them how to talk to each other. So I know that Tom has young people in his home. I have had and do have young people in my home. And one of the things that I do is I take away the phones and force them to go talk to other people. Makes for exciting times.
I force them to speak in public. No, 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 no joke. So as Hassan knows, we have a very deep rooted cultural,
Yeah.
background, and we are invited to do these guest lectures all the time at either colleges, universities, um, religious environments, whether it be what is it called? UU churches or something like that.
Hmm.
United, no, Universal,
Oh, the Unitarians.
whatever.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah, go ahead.
but come all you faithful, right? Anyway,
Hmm.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to make fun if any of you are you. I don't mean that as a dig. Anyway, but we get invited to all these things, and I go and I do a lot of speaking engagements, and one of the ways that I kind of I force them to the front of the line. I say, well, I want to talk about a particular topic. You're going to talk about it because the age you are, it comes differently from you than it does from me, right? So
Hmm.
like certain things are just, so to your point, you get rid of the phones. Well, when we're in
As
those
much as you
environments,
can.
we're in those environments, we don't have our phones anyway. So I can't take
Right.
the phone. They don't have the phone, but I force them to speak in public. None of my kids are afraid of public speaking, by the way.
Okay, they're not afraid of public speaking, but are they afraid of approaching someone one on one and having a conversation with them? Because I noticed this starting to happen probably about
No, because what happens
10
at the
years
end
ago.
of these lectures is we end up sitting on the side and people come up to them all the time to
Okay.
ask additional questions so they are forced to speak one on one with them. Now, it is a little different to your point. They're the ones being come up to.
Sure.
They're not going out and seeking these people after these events and saying, hey, do you have any additional questions? I'd like to, ask me this, ask me that, whatever. But it still forces a one-on-one conversation after the fact.
Right. Yeah. 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 Okay. No, that's good. When I read this whole entire section with, with Lawrence and Joe, and they're running around, and then there's other aspects of that in the book as well. And a little bit of talking, and the book does sort of address their, not really courtship, but they're sort of in the 19th century way, kind of going around and around, just like in War and Peace, which we talked about. Um, how that opened with a party. Um, I think again, it's the end of an era, right? Not the end of a civilization. So I think part of the end of an era of mass communication, or putting people in situations where, or not putting people, we are at an end of an era when the ability to engage with people in mass one-on-one in person, um is less useful for getting the message out, whatever your message may happen to be, than engaging with someone electronically or engaging with people electronically, and hoping that you're blasting into this void of people who are going to engage with you, which of course is what the internet has taught us. It's taught us how to do that. So I'm sure your kids know just as well as mine do that if they have 11,000 followers on Instagram, they can go talk to all 11,000 of those people, which is way more than the 100 people or 200 people that may walk up to them, 10% of whom may actually have a question for them at the end of a particular speaking engagement. If the percentages are the same with your engagements as they have been with mine in the past, it's usually under 10%.
Yeah.
You know, and so where the value is, I think also is something that's shifting around, and we don't really know how to effectively articulate that to people. And so I try to articulate to my kids that the value of engagement is in that interaction with that human being, not in the technological object you have in your hand.
For sure.
And that's a difficult lesson to kind of get across. Sometimes you got to be, well, sometimes it's like taking away the stick from my 7-year-old he wants to put in his mouth. So,
well, and I think there's something to be said too. So the whole taking away the phone thing, I don't quote unquote take it from them, but we've
sure.
had a long standing tradition in my house where we don't bring the cell phones to the dinner table. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
no, we don't sit down and eat dinner every day at 5 o'clock. Like we're not that kind of family. And if everyone's schedule is all over the place and you're sitting down at the dinner table by yourself and eating, have your phone, who cares? But the second an additional person sits down there with you, the both of you put your phone aside.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of been a rule of thumb. Now that goes to before my kids even had cell phones, and my wife and I were the only ones in the house that had cell phones.
Yeah.
We wouldn't bring our cell phones to the table. So
Yeah.
it just became a habit that, and because mom and dad did it when our kids were teenagers and started getting cell phones, they just followed suit. So that,
Right.
and now my kids are all, even though they're young, they're still young adults. So
Yeah.
my youngest is graduating college next week, but as even as adults, they still come to the dinner table with no cell phone. Like that's just,
Yeah.
it's been a habit of ours. So, and to your point, it's just because you want to be in the moment. It's not about, like for us, it's not about, we don't use that scenario to justify the quality interaction, human to human interaction. We justify getting rid of the cell phones in that environment about being in the moment,
In the moment. Yeah.
because it's not about one-on-one interaction at that point. We have very typically, just to give you an idea, we don't eat every day at dinner. We don't eat dinner every day as a family, but on Sunday we do. Sunday's our day. Everybody comes to the table. There's usually 10, 12 of us that sit at the table, depending on who's coming over for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Like my nephew will come, my aunt, whatever. So we'll have additional family members, but you're not getting one-on-one interaction at that point, but it's still not any less valuable to have that collective of human interaction and the different varying degrees of generations at the table. And,
Yeah.
like we have, my nephew has a daughter who's only 2.5 years old. It's important for her to see at 2.5 that we're all talking to each other and not looking at our phones. Right. So
There's an important piece in a little bit, which we're not going to get to today because we got to wrap this up. But there's an important piece where they sacrifice, the March family does. They sacrifice their Christmas, right, for a family that's down the street, right, who's, they're immigrants, and they're poverty stricken, and so they literally pick up their entire Christmas and they take it down the street, and they're stuffing cloths and holes in windows, and they're feeding like the little sickly kid, and they're giving up their Christmas breakfast, which is like milk and bread. Like it wasn't anything huge, but those people had nothing, right? And so they're taking that down the street to those folks, and it's a touching moment, and I think it's in like chapter 3 or 4 of Little Women, and that ties into what you're talking about here, because one of the thread lines through the book is traditions, right? And the power of traditions, right? Even in the midst of an apocalyptic civil war where everything's falling apart and you can't get anything more than bread and milk on Christmas, there are still traditions that matter to engage with folks around. And one of the things that is interesting to me is, as society gets redefined in a seculum, at the end of a seculum cycle, right, at the end of a historical cycle, traditions get redefined as well. But the core of what people require hasn't changed for 5,000 years. How we do that may change, right? Or the manner, even the tools we use maybe might change, but we still require, to your point, one-on-one engagement with a real human being without technological or object interference. You still require that, because how else are you going to learn about community at 2 other than experiencing community at 2?
Right.
And the families that do that are the ones that are going to make sure the republic stays together. And I don't care what color they are. I don't care what class group they come from. I don't care about any of that crap. That all becomes nonsense after at a certain point, or maybe I should say nonsense, sauce for the goose, right? It's about, do you have those traditions? So I know many people who come out of, we were talking about, talking at like a Unitarian church. I know many people who come out of specific religious traditions. That's what they do on Saturdays or Sundays or Fridays, and so they have those traditions. In my household, we do we do as many days of the week as we can to eat together.
Yeah.
Period.
When my kids were younger, we did too. It's just as they got older, it just got impossible.
Yeah, it becomes more of a challenge. To your point, it becomes more of a challenge. But even my wife and I were talking about that, because we're not quite there yet, but it's coming, where like, it's just going to be her and me.
That's it. Just the two of you.
Just the two of you. Just the two of us, like it says in that song. And so, one of the things we were joking about was, we have to eat at least one meal a day together just to see each other, right?
Yeah.
That's tradition. That matters. Even at the end of an era, that matters. Okay. Solutions to problems. Let's talk about solutions. I don't know if we've resolved anything. This is like the third or fourth episode we've done where we haven't resolved anything. We just talked a little bit about the book, and then we brought up a bunch of things.
There's a little thing here, though. There's a little thing that, just to wrap up what you and I were just talking about.
Yeah.
With the traditions and the cell phone thing and the dinner and all that stuff. There's a little thing there that leaders, in my opinion, can take, and a small solution to the problem that kind of went away a little bit, if you think about it, in like the early 2000s, which was leaders, they need to lead by example, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I don't see a lot of leaders going out of their way to sacrifice, as you just mentioned about in the book. Do you make sacrifices? Do your employees see you make sacrifices for the betterment of the company? Do your employees see you making sacrifices for the betterment of them? Like, are you willing to take to sacrifice certain things? I'll give you an example. I have a client, obviously no names mentioned. I have a client that was struggling through COVID. He eliminated his own salary so that he did not lay anybody off. And they were still doing business that just wasn't busy enough for he had to make a decision. Do I lay off whatever it was? I don't remember the equivalent. It was 2 or 3 people, whatever, in order for me to not to take a hit. And he decided not to. He elected to eliminate his. What do you think that does for him in the emotional equity of his people? Right? No, they're not quitting. I'm sorry. I hate to tell you this. They're never quitting that job. That guy probably just kept 20 people for the rest of his life as a leader. If he decides to close up his company and start working for somebody else, all 20 of those people are going to go work. But we don't see enough of that kind of, like, the solution. It's so simple. Like, are you making sacrifice? Now, he probably didn't have to take the hit on his whole salary. He could have taken half and laid off 1 person or 2 people instead of 4. And he probably would have got similar results from the emotional response from his people, but he felt compelled to save all of them. I don't think we see that, and we certainly don't see that in bigger companies. Are you kidding me? Don't even get me started. The inflated bonuses and all this other BS when it comes to, like, big companies that just take and take and take. But to your point earlier about local government and local small businesses, I do find there's real leadership there. I do find that some of the solutions, and I think one of our bigger problems is we don't allow those solutions to be the answer above, like to push it up.
Yes.
And say, I don't know. I don't know a single CEO of a Fortune 500 company that would have done what that guy did.
So there's a biblical admonition here that I wrote in my notes. Love your neighbor as yourself, which is what we always think of. But actually, Jesus starts with this one. He says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all your mind, and all of your soul. In some translations, it's all of your spirit. But whatever, I'm not going to get into theological dissonance. Just to give you the whole thing right there. And then he says, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then he follows up with, and the entire law and the commandments rest on these 2 ideas. That's the whole structure of reality. So love the thing that you have above you, the hierarchy, right? And in order to your point about the boss, in order to serve that hierarchy, sacrifice and love your neighbor as you would love yourself. Because what would you want your neighbor to do for you?
Yeah.
You would want your neighbor to sacrifice what they had for you if you were in that situation. And you're right. If we saw that at scale, like there was a local election. I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, obviously, for the local municipality that I live in. And they are asking the people of the municipality to vote for a tax increase, in essence. And the people who are going to benefit from that are not setting down their salaries at all. And it keeps getting voted down. And they can't understand why. And I literally go, it's because you're not making the appropriate sacrifice in the correct direction. Exactly. And so I think one of the major solutions to our problems is leaders have got to start making appropriate sacrifices, or to your point, leading by example.
Absolutely right. Again, it's funny. I saw it within one generation, talking about, love thy neighbor, right?
Yeah.
And I saw it. Never mind love your neighbor.
Yeah,
do you actually know your neighbor? Because I saw
right.
I've seen in one generation that the neighbors across the street from us, my kids don't even know them. They have no idea who they are. They don't like that. To me is even weird. Like, I grew up in a neighborhood where I literally could throw a rock, and I'll say it this way. I could be down 3 streets away, throw a rock and break a car window and say, oh crap, I'm out of here, run home. By the time I got to my house, my mother would know about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, Mrs. Libby, did you know that your son broke the window? Blah, blah, blah. I'd walk in the house. My mother was like, what are you thinking? And I'm like, oh crap, I forgot. You already knew. Like, because all the neighbors knew each other. They would, they would talk to that. It takes a village thing is gone. And I don't understand why. I don't understand why. I think we're losing. I guess it goes back to what you were talking about, getting rid of the cell phone. The distraction caused different problems. The more technology we get, the more problem. We're losing sight of like that. I'll go one step further here, because I never bought into the whole, treat someone like the phrase, right? Treat somebody the way that you want to be treated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's crap. I always tell my kids, treat somebody the way they want to be treated, because it might not be the way that you want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
Learn and understand them, talk to them, find out how would you like me to treat you? Because sometimes I don't care if you're blunt and direct with me, but if you're blunt and direct with somebody who doesn't like that, you could offend them. So you can't treat somebody the way you want to be. You have to treat them the way they want to be treated. Now, that all being said, it goes to leadership and understanding your people, learning their habit, learning their motivations, you got to be involved. You got to lead by that example.
So leaders, and not leaders. This is the last thing I'll say that we can close, or last thing I'll bring up that we can close. There's endless talk about problems.
Yeah.
Endless. One of my massive frustrations and one of the core reasons I do this podcast is because I'm tired of talking about problems. I named off 4 of them today, right? Yeah. That have been well documented. Both sides of the problems have been documented. All aspects of the problems have been documented. And for those of you who didn't hear that part or maybe skipped over it, the 4 problems are, diversity, personal debt, personal credit card debt, COVID, and the 4th one was I can't remember what the 4th one was. It doesn't matter. Those social media fragmentation. That's right, social media fragmentation. Those 4 problems, we have had volume after volume after volume after volume that have been produced, most of it on the internet, of words about what the problems are and where the problems come from and who's to blame for the problems and what was the root. We've had the exploration. Give me a solution. Problem. Because once you give me a solution, then I have a direction. And once I have a direction, then I'm no longer seeing something through like it's a transparent piece of glass. Now it becomes opaque. It becomes solid. It becomes solvable. All 4 of those problems have solutions. We may not like the solution. It may not make us comfortable. It may be hard to implement. I'll grant you all of that. It may gore some people's sacred cows, but it is a solution. Can't get away from that. It may not be one you like. It might not make you feel comfortable. It might gore your sacred cow, but it is a solution. And when we start going to a solution-based conversation, fundamentally, now we can actually start moving towards a goal, towards a direction. Now we are at a way out of chaos, rather than just continually wandering around in a cul-de-sac of chaos all the time. I'm tired of being in the cul-de-sac. I want out.
Well, and the positive, the super positive piece of this is, as soon as you hear one solution, it should open up a floodgate, right? Like, because that's typically what happens. Somebody comes up with a solution. Somebody else says, oh, I like that, but I think we should add this, or I like that, but I don't think it fixes this component of it. So we should figure out, like, it all of a sudden opens up a different kind of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
That now all of a sudden, okay, it may skew your pathway. Like, you just said that at least you have a direction, at least you have it might skew that a little bit and open up the road a little bit. But would it be a terrible thing if we found 2 or 3 solutions that actually would work? And now we're trying to figure out, so what gives us the best outcome of these 3 solutions? Which one gives us the best? It's a different conversation at that point. Right. But I agree with you. I think I think at least 2 of the 4 that you just named, we're not going to see solutions come for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, the social media thing, I think we're just creating more and more, because every time we turn around, there's a new one there. TikTok has opened up a completely different door of challenges that Facebook didn't have. And now Facebook saw that and they said, we can do that. And social media, I think, is going to be, the solution to the social media dilemma is better parenting. And I think until somebody tells parents that they need to be better parents, that's not going to fix itself. Social media is never going to fix itself. And we're certainly not going to police it, because you got all the people complaining about the First Amendment infringement and all this other stuff that happens. So people are afraid. They're afraid to fix the social media problem. But I think we can, if we get better parenting out of it. So, like, if we can get these younger parents to understand that social media is a problem and that you need to help your kids solve it, I think that's going to be that's the only solution I can see forward from this, at least the social media part. There's another one in there. There's another one in there that I thought I think very similarly to. We don't have to go into all of them, but there's another one in there at the very least. 2 of the 4 that you mentioned. I think that parenting is the problem there. Yeah. Not the government, not leadership. The leadership comes from within at that point. It's what's the leadership structure look like within the home? How do you start teaching your kids to be just human beings and better people? Like,
how very pre-modern of you, Tom.
I don't know. Maybe
you know what? Well, you know what?
What can I say? Do you see the gray hair?
You've seen a few sunsets and a few sunrises, a few summers. I often say this, and I'll close with this. I've been saying this a lot lately. Postmodern problems require pre-modern solutions. And we ignore those pre-modern solutions because we think we're more sophisticated. And there's nothing harder to break than the iron triangle of, like, arrogance, deceit, and then just, like, resentment. But you've got to break that iron triangle if you want to actually get to a solution to a problem.
Listen, Occam's razor has been around for eon, right?
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah. And it still applies today. Most times the simplest answer is probably the right one. So why are we trying to overcomplicate and over sophisticate every single problem we encounter? Sometimes it really is simple.
And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And, Tom and I are out. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.